The sun was a dying ember over the jagged horizon, spilling molten gold across the dusty plains of New Mexico. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush, scorched earth, and something more subtle, an unease that clung to the small settlement of Red Willow. It was a town stitched together by rough-hewn wood, gunpowder and whispers of old grudges. The Apache tribe had always walked these lands, their shadows stretching long and silent across the mesas. Yet today, in the heart of this unforgiving landscape, one soul trembled under a burden that no desert wind could wash away. The Apache bride, Aylen, stood at the edge of the wooden bridge that spanned the shallow creek, her moccasins buried in the sand, her hands trembling at her sides. Her veil fluttered like a wounded bird in the wind. Tears carved silent paths down her dust-streaked cheeks. The villagers stared from behind shuttered windows, some curious, some fearful, but none dared approach. Aylen's heart thudded like a drum in a war dance, each beat echoing a question she had long feared to ask herself. Could she ever be free of the chains her circumstances had wrought? He was there before her, standing tall and worn, a figure carved from the very essence of the West, his hat tilted low, shadowing eyes that had seen too many sunrises and too many deaths. His coat bore the dust of endless trails, and his boots carried the stories of battles fought in silence. The cowboy, Silas Kane, had arrived without ceremony, his horse's hooves sinking quietly into the sand. He approached slowly, a stranger to many, but somehow familiar to her in a way that unsettled her. "There's no need for you to pretend," he said softly, his voice cutting through the oppressive heat like a blade through cloth. It was not a command nor a plea, but a statement that carried the weight of truth. Aylen shook, not from cold, but from the sheer intensity of being seen. She had spent months, perhaps years, weaving a mask of compliance, a fragile shell to survive a world that demanded conformity. And here was a man who, without judgment, tore it away with nothing more than a few words. The memory of her journey here was sharp in her mind. Taken from her people under the guise of marriage, Aylen had been thrust into a world that neither understood her nor allowed her to breathe. The townsfolk had whispered about her strange ways, her songs in the language of the wind and fire, the way she could read the patterns of clouds and the flight of hawks. They called her wild, untamed, unpredictable. They did not see the girl who had danced under the moon with laughter in her eyes, the girl who had dreamed of freedom long before she could even name it. Silas knelt down a pace away, keeping his hands visible, non-threatening, yet radiating an unshakable calm. "You don't have to wear the mask for me," he said again, his tone even gentler. "Not here!" "Not now." His gaze met hers, unwavering, searching, and somehow she felt the walls inside her chest begin to crumble. For the first time, the years of restraint, the nightly prayers for courage, seemed almost worth something, because here was someone who recognized her truth, who offered no chains in return. Aylen's mind flickered with memories of her people, the stories her grandmother told of the Apache warriors, the women who held the strength of rivers in their hearts. She had always believed that strength meant survival at all costs, but now she wondered if it meant something else. Defiance in the face of oppression, the courage to let her tears fall in the open, the bravery to admit fear without shame. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered finally, her voice cracking. "You don't understand what it means to be bound, to have no choice." Silas did not flinch. His eyes softened. "I understand more than you think," he said. "I've walked trails where the wind cuts deeper than any blade, where every step costs you a piece of yourself. But I've learned something important. No one can decide who you are but you. Not them, not anyone." Aylen swallowed hard, the taste of dust and sorrow thick on her tongue. She had been trained to hide, to obey, to bend like the willow in the storm. But his words ignited something she had almost forgotten. Hope. A fragile, dangerous hope, but hope nonetheless. The town clock chimed, and the sound reverberated like a warning. In the shadowed alleys and behind shuttered windows, the whispers grew louder. Some villagers watched with suspicion, others with morbid curiosity. And still, Aylen did not move away. She did not flee, For the first time since she had been forced into this world, she felt the stirrings of agency. Silas extended his hand, not to lead, but to offer a choice. "Walk with me," he said, "even if it's just a step. Even if it's only for a moment, take that step for yourself." Her heart pounded violently, a war drum echoing in her chest. Fear and longing battled within her, each vying for dominance. And then, almost imperceptibly, she placed her hand over his. The contact was electric, not because of desire, but because it was genuine, an affirmation of her will. She stepped forward, one foot then another, and the world seemed to shift slightly, as if the plains themselves were acknowledging her courage. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and gunpowder, an ironic reminder of the life she had left behind and the life she might yet claim. She looked at Silas, her eyes wide with unspoken questions. "And if they come for me?" she asked, a tremor in her voice. Silas smiled faintly, a shadow of weariness in the corners of his mouth. "Then they'll have to answer to me. But more importantly, you'll have already answered to yourself." Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat magnified, echoing across the canyon walls. The creek below murmured a song that only she seemed to hear, and in its rhythm she found a strange kind of courage. Memories of laughter, of stolen glances under the moon, of her mother's quiet wisdom, they all converged into a single, blazing resolve. She would no longer hide. She would no longer pretend. The first step was always the hardest. But as she followed Silas down the dusty path away from the town, the walls of fear that had imprisoned her for so long began to crumble. She walked not just away from her captors, but toward something larger, freedom, dignity, the raw and untamed possibility of life reclaimed. They rode together across the open plains, the horizon stretching endlessly before them. The wind tugged at Aylen's hair, at her veil, at the remnants of her past life. And she laughed, low, trembling and wholly free. Silas watched her with a quiet pride, the kind born not from conquest, but from witnessing someone reclaim their soul. As night fell, stars igniting the sky like scattered embers, Aylen spoke softly, almost to herself. "I thought courage was surviving them, but it's surviving me. Surviving my fear, my doubt, my silence." Silas nodded, the firelight from their small camp flickering across his weathered face. "And you're doing it. You've already begun." The Apache bride, once trembling with tears, now sat upright, her eyes bright, fierce, alive. The land stretched infinitely before her, wild and untamed, but no longer threatening. She had learned the first lesson of true freedom. It was not a gift, nor a ransom, it was a choice. And for the first time, she had chosen herself. And so, under the vast, indifferent sky of the Wild West, a girl who had been taken from her world began to walk, step by step, toward the life she would define, not by the laws of others, not by the chains of fear, but by the fierce, unyielding fire of her own spirit. Somewhere in the distance, the wind carried the whispers of the town, curious and fearful, but Aylen no longer heard them. Her world had become the horizon itself, boundless and hers. And as Silas glanced at her, he knew one thing: some souls were never meant to be tamed. Some hearts, once awakened, could never settle for anything less than the wild, unbroken truth. Aylen leaned back against her horse, the weight of the past melting like morning frost. And for the first time in her life, she believed that freedom was not a dream. It was something she could live. The stars blinked above, indifferent witnesses to a story that had only just begun. And in the quiet vastness, a new legend was being written, not of conquest, not of possession, but of courage, of choice, and the unyielding power of a spirit refusing to be silenced.